It's blatantly obvious that anti-trans policies do not protect people. That is not even remotely what it's about. Its purpose should be obvious: the continued oppression and erasure of the transgender community. However, it also has a secondary, more hidden purpose: the subjugation of all women. In They Want Us Dead Part 3, I talked about how stereotypes and appeals to purity are used to attack certain groups by dividing them against one another. Hence why you see people like Blair White, who despite being trans herself is actually a transphobe. We see this being used by TERFs, otherwise known as trans-exclusionary radical feminists, to try and define who can be considered quote-unquote real women. Now I know some people think they have a really good transceiver. They can spot a trans person easily. Well, the short answer is...
you're wrong.
People of both genders come in all shapes and sizes. There are cis women who stand over 6 feet tall, as well as being very muscular and masculine looking. There are cis men who are under 5 feet tall, who have a very natural feminine appearance that makes it easy for them to be mistaken for women. With all this variation, do you really think it's that easy to clock someone? Well, it's not just you who thinks this way. TERFs think this way too. They also like to believe that they can spot a trans person easily, but you already know the response. This type of gender policing has negative effects on everyone. For example, a boy in North Carolina who, while using the men's room, had a guy peep at him in order to check if he was a boy or a girl. That's right, a grown man peeped at a kid in the bathroom to check his gender. This was around the time North Carolina was considering its own bathroom bill. And he's not the only one. In Florida, 55-year-old Fio de Veloz, who, after being arrested in Miami on an old drug charge, was mistaken for being trans, and was sent to an all-male prison. Apparently she'd been taking estradiol to alleviate symptoms of menopause, but the idiot of a nurse named Fatu Harris assumed she was a man undergoing HRT. She was reclassified as a man and sent to prison. Eventually the error was noticed and she was relocated 10 hours later. In a lawsuit that was filed, the judge determined that the staff had been deliberately indifferent to her well-being after they refused to reclassify her as she requested. And again in North Carolina, a cis woman was accosted in a Walmart because the other patrons thought she was trans. Vox and Medium both have articles covering similar incidents all over the country as well. Minorities can also be specifically affected by these policies. Hannah Echo, in her article on BuzzFeed, describes her experience of having to prove her gender as a black woman. In the article, she describes how the assumption of black women as non-feminine permeates U.S. history. Black women are often given traits like being strong or impervious to pain. Granted, these traits sound awesome, but they are often associated with men. Black women like Michelle Obama, Venus, and Serena Williams have been ridiculed and are often compared to men. Now I have to ask, how are cis women, or women in general as a matter of fact, safer? Well, the truth is, we're not. There are other areas where trans individuals are discriminated against. For example, trans individuals face discrimination in the workplace, as well as housing and the job market. Now, if you're cis, imagine for a moment that when you applied for a position and they threw out your application based on your appearance. To them, you didn't look feminine enough, or maybe your voice was too deep. Whatever it was, they didn't think you were a real woman. Or how about getting terminated from a job because someone started a rumor that you are actually transgender? What about being forced to disrobe in front of someone to prove your gender? Or being threatened with the loss of employment unless you disrobe to prove your gender? And who do you think won't be subjected to this? Well, the ones men and certain organizations decide are cisgendered. That's right, if you don't look or act like what they think women should be, then to them, you're not a real woman. The fact of how these policies are used to keep women down is not surprising if you know the people behind them. For example, North Carolina's bathroom bill and other similar policies are heavily backed by religious far-right organizations like North Carolina's Values Coalition, a religious right-wing lobbying group. There is also the Institute for Faith and Family, a known anti-LGBT organization that spent $250,000 in ad campaigns promoting the bill. This pattern is in fact quite common. Religious and far-right organizations often talk about how they need to protect women and family values, These so-called family values are largely based off teachings of the Bible and are largely sexist and patriarchal, where women are seen as inferior and men rule over them. But they like to write it off as God's will while violating other biblical laws, which shows this is not out of some devotion to God, but a desire to rule over other people. Now, do these sound like the kind of people who really care about the well-being of women? What this all is, if it isn't already obvious, is a massive ploy. How often do these same groups push propaganda on men, telling them real men have to protect women, as well as pushing these policies that supposedly protect women from an imaginary boogie monster? There have been multiple studies showing that in jurisdictions where pro-trans laws were implemented, women were not in any more danger than they were before. There are always outliers. Of course, that's true of any group. Do you honestly believe that cis women don't assault other women in women-only spaces, or that men won't sexually assault trans women? Hopefully you answered no to both. If trans women achieve equal protection, so do cis women. If trans women continue being oppressed, so will cis women. The fight for equality involves all women.